Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Vincent. Hope you guys are doing well. Today is December 1st, 2020, and we're going to cover a topic here real quick that comes up all the time when we are doing creative financing deals, and I want to show you exactly how you can profit from what's called 401k vesting. Now, we're going to cover a number of different topics here as it relates to 401ks investing. But when you're doing creative financing, by creative financing, I'm referring to any variant of owner finance, whether that's a contract for deed, land contract, subject to, you name it, what all the different variant bond for title, grant deeds, etc. Then you need to understand how. A number of different topics here as it relates to. Sorry, just checking my volume. How exactly you can turn what would be not a deal into a deal simply because of 401k vesting. Let me give you an example. So what most people do not know, most real estate investors do not know, is that you can utilize funds from a 401k for a down payment on a properly structured. And by properly structured, I'm referring to under IRS guidelines, under the IRS installment sales contract guidelines. Properly structured, well, it doesn't even have to be under that, though, because it could be done with via land trusts and other things. But nonetheless, a properly structured contract that essentially you have somebody that doesn't have cash for a down payment, but they want to buy a house. And through their 401k, what they have the ability to do, if they are fully vested, and we're going to cover what that means here in a second, is they have the ability to borrow directly from their 401k, okay? And it is a loan. Now, it's very important to understand how this works, especially if you're going to try to explain it to somebody. They're going to borrow from their 401k, okay? By borrowing from their 401k, they're actually borrowing from themselves. So when they get set up on the installment plan for payments, they're actually paying themselves back plus interest, okay? So it is a win-win from the standpoint of the buyer / borrower in the situation, because essentially it is a forced savings plan. That's really all it is, okay? What they have the ability to do, let's say they have $100,000 in their 401k, and you're doing a deal and they need $30,000 down to get into it. They don't have $30,000 in cash in their checking account, but they've got the $100,000 and they're fully vested in the 401k. Well, they can borrow the $30,000. They can borrow actually more than the $30,000 and utilize that as a down payment on the home without, and this is very important to understand, without any taxation, okay, or penalty, okay? Because most people don't want to tap into a 401k because they're concerned about taxes and they're concerned about paying penalties, because typically you're going to pay the going rate for your income tax plus a 10% penalty for accessing the funds early. When you take a loan, those do not apply. So you can take somebody that is stone broke, and if they're fully vested in a 401k where they've got cash invested, and turn that person into an actual bona fide buyer and homeowner in an owner finance contract, okay? So let's talk about vesting for a second. I realize this is somewhat of a boring topic, but I've made tons of money because I understand how to access the 401k without them having to take, pay taxes or have any type of penalty, and be able to explain it to them, and also to talk to their 401k provider to help get them the loan, which happens very quickly. Typically, it's within 24 to 48 hours. Sometimes it can be a little bit longer because it depends on what they're doing. Sometimes, depending on who the company is, they're actually liquidating some of the underlying investments. Most of the time not. It's just a loan against the underlying investments. So in those scenarios, what happens is they get to continue to profit off of the stock market and what mutual funds or whatever they've got in there, while they get a loan that they're paying back to themselves plus interest. So they have this little forced savings plan that they're basically paying back. But vesting, let's talk about vesting real quick, because I have students in JVPs and stuff all the time, And one of the pre-qualification questions that they're required to ask people is, if they don't have enough funds for, or even if they do have enough funds, we still want to know anyway, is if the person has a 401k. Okay. And then the very next question is, okay, how much is in it? And are you fully vested? Now, what does fully vested means? Well, if you understand 401k vesting, you can be fully vested or not fully vested. Okay. There's two different, there's other variants as well, but fully vested means that the employee, in this case, the buyer or borrower, owns and controls 100% of the money, the underlying funds in that 401k. So what does that mean? Well, what that means is they have full access to 100% of the funds. If they are not fully vested, why would somebody not be fully vested? Well, the way that a lot of employers do it is what they'll do is they hang a little carrot out there, and that carrot is you have to work here for, let's say, 3 years first before our matching contributions to your 401k become fully vested for you. And what they're trying to do, the purpose of an employer, holding a little carrot out there and making there be a time period, which they don't have to do, most of them do it, making there be a time period before the employee is fully vested is because they're looking for what's called employee retention. Okay. If you've ever been an employer, employee retention is, one of your top priorities because it's very expensive to have to market for, locate, interview, to find qualified employees for whatever position. And so you don't want turnover. You don't want churn. You want to put enough little, carrots out in front of the horse that the horse wants to stay and keep going. Okay. And if you understand it, the employer-employee relationship, it's a very, how do we say this? It's a conflict of interest. There's really no other way to say it. Okay. So and if you guys are hearing noise in the background, I've got subcontractors over my attic repairing an air handler. So you may hear some extra noise here, but it's a conflict of interest. Let me explain to you what the conflict is so it'll make sense. The conflict is simply this. It is employers pay just enough so employees don't quit, okay? And they provide benefit plans and that kind of thing. Employees do just enough not to get fired, okay? And that's the conflict. We did webinars before, and they showed that the average 8-hour workday, there's about 2 hours and 38 minutes worth of actual productivity that's done by the employee in that 8-hour period. The rest of the time they're screwing around on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or whatever, shopping on Amazon, all these kinds of things. And so there's a conflict there, okay? And so what employers do, like I said, for employee retention is they want to make sure that they are putting out enough of a incentive to have someone stick around because it's very expensive to have employee churn. And if you've ever had to go through the interview and hiring process, let me just tell you, it's not a pleasant experience. Okay. I mean, most of you have been through it on the employee side, but from the employer side, it's like, suck the life out of you trying to do that. Okay. So there will be situations where employers will do matching. Okay. Or they will provide a certain amount of money up front or during, specific periods of time, but the employee will not be fully vested. And that's why it's always important to ask that question so that you can understand right out of the gate whether or not there are funds that are available for the loan so that you can make money on an owner finance deal and sell that property to them and get a down payment up front. Okay. So anytime that you're dealing with somebody and it looks like they don't have enough funds liquid in their checking account, money market, whatever, you always want to find out if they've got a 401k. And if they do have a 401k, find out how much money they have in it and if they're fully vested. Now, a lot of times you'll ask them the question, are you fully vested? And they won't have any idea what you mean. Okay. I run into like real estate investors who don't know what it means when I ask them that question. And this actually came up yesterday and somebody didn't understand what I was talking about. And so we figured we'd go ahead and do a quick tutorial on this so you understand. If they don't know, and sometimes they won't know, then what you want to do is right then on the spot, jump on the phone with their 401k provider and get a representative on the phone, have them look at their plan and find out exactly how much money they have in it and whether or not they're fully vested. If they're fully vested, then you have access to the funds. If they're not fully vested, then it's a no-go. Okay. And you want to know very quickly. That's one of the very first 9 questions that we ask when a buyer pre-qual for an owner finance deal. All right. And trust me, I realize this is a boring topic, but this is one of those things where it can make or break a deal. Okay. It can make a deal happen because you knew something that somebody else didn't know, didn't understand about how to access funds for a down payment, where otherwise the buyer / borrower in this case didn't have the requisite liquidity, to be able to do that deal. All right. So it's always important to ask that question to see if they have it. Now, what happens, like I said, is if they do have it and they're fully vested, then normally sometime between 24 and 72 hours later, they will get a check or a wire from their 401k provider that can then be utilized for the purchase of the property. Okay. Now, in some plans, they can actually use the funds for other stuff as well. So it's, each plan is different. You really have to sort of dig into them, but they can legally do this, like I said, with no taxation and no penalty on a loan with interest that they pay back to themselves. So there's no actual technical loss to them. It simply is a forced savings plan that they pay back. Okay. So again, very important to understand 401ks are another source of potential liquidity right out of the gate for all these variants of owner finance deals. Okay. Number 1. Number 2, you got to find out how much money they've got in the plan. Number 3, you got to find out if they're vested and make sure they understand what fully vested means when they answer the question. Okay. And if not, like I said, just, the next step is get them on the phone with the 401k provider and find out yourself. Okay. It takes, a couple minutes on the phone, and that way you can determine whether or not they have the ability to proceed. Now, the other thing is if I ever have to get on the phone with a 401k provider, I'm always going to ask and walk through, okay, what are all of the steps that need to happen before this person ends up with funds in hand? In other words, what do they have to do, right? What are all the steps? What forms do they have to fill out? What documents do you need from us? There was a deal I did back, I think it was probably 2011, and it was with TIA Cruff or whatever. They actually wanted a copy of our contract. Okay, they wanted to ensure that it was a legitimate deal, and there were certain clauses in the contract that we had to sort of massage to their satisfaction before they would release the funds. That's why it's always important in that situation when you're talking to them to find out what exactly is it that you're going to need in order for this person to get money. Okay, because you want to know immediately right out of the gate. Otherwise, you're just going back and forth and you waste a bunch of time, and you don't want to do that. All right. And then in that particular case, we had to go back through several contract revisions to get the final underwriter happy with the document before they released the funds. And then they released the funds. And then, of course, we got paid and the buyer got the house. So it was a great deal. But the buyer obviously had no idea that they could access their 401k. And I had to walk them through the entire process, start to finish. But it's an excellent source of additional funds that can be used for down payment. Again, no taxation, no penalty on the side of the borrower, in this case, your buyer, and they can have the funds typically within, like I said, 24 to 72 hours, sometimes as long as 5 days if they're liquidating securities or whatever. But typically it's fairly quick, and that way you can get your deal closed out. Sometimes like I said, you do have to hold their hand through the process, but when you take a look at a deal and our minimum deal size, let me rephrase it, our minimum on our little peanut deals is, $30,000 in upfront down payment. It's worth it. Okay. It's worth a 5-minute phone call to a 401k provider to ensure that they're fully vested and to find out exactly what hoops the buyer / borrower and or you are going to have to jump through in order to get those funds to get a deal done. Okay. I mean, you do a 5-minute phone call to make $30,000. And that's our minimum deal size that we even look at. Let me rephrase that: minimum profit on an owner finance deal that we're even looking at. So it makes, for me anyway, if I'm talking to somebody, I'll do a 5-minute phone call to see if we can pull a quick 30 grand, okay, from something that otherwise would not have happened anyway. So always ask that, keep that in, sort of in your toolbox, in your arsenal, because a lot of people out there, I'm just telling you, a lot of people out there don't understand what they can do with a 401k. Okay. Now, this is what I'm looking. This page that you're looking at, it's IRS website. I'm going to go ahead and read this because we're going to turn this into a podcast as well, and so they can't see my string. I'll actually read you the definition from the IRS. Vesting in a retirement plan means ownership. This means that each employee will vest or own a certain percentage of their account in the plan each year. An employee who is 100% vested in his or her account balance owns 100% of it, and the employer cannot forfeit or take it back for any reason. Amounts that are not vested may be forfeited by employees when they are paid their account balance. For example, when the employee terminates employment or when they don't work more than 500 hours in a year for 5 years. Now, what they're saying there is that, as an example, let's say the plan required the employee to work for 3 years before they became fully vested, and there was 100% matching for every contribution the employee made. Well, they worked there 2.5 years, and they've made all these contributions, and they think that they're getting 100% matching, which they would have been, but then they quit. Well, all of that money contributed by the employer, it goes right back to the employer. Okay? It does not go to the employee because they're not fully vested. And fully vested, again, as you can read here from the IRS definition, means ownership. Okay. Now, next up, he said they're going to qualify or define your employee contributions. An employee's own contributions to the plan, for example, employee elective deferrals deducted from salary, are always 100% vested or owned by the employee. Well, of course they are. They should be. It's their money. Now we talk about the IRS's definition of employer contributions. Different vesting requirements apply to employer contributions depending on the type of plan the employer sponsors. Okay, this is why it's important to talk to the plan providers so you know exactly what you're dealing with, because they're not the same. So they go on to say, SEP and simple IRA and other IRA-based plans require that all contributions to the plan are always 100% vested. Okay? So there's another little nugget of knowledge for you if you're dealing with a SEP or a simple IRA or other IRA-based plans. The focus of this was really 401ks, but there you go. Fully vested in an IRA, all right? All right, next up, they're going to talk about qualified defined contribution plans. For example, profit sharing or 401k plans can offer a variety of different vesting schedules that are determined by the plan document. Again, this is why it's always important to check to find out exactly what their plan covers. These can range from immediate vesting, that means they own it 100% right then, to 100% vesting after 3 years of service, as defined by the plan, generally 1,000 hours worked over 12 months, to a vesting schedule that increases the employee's vested percentage for each year of service with the employer. This sounds easy enough, but it can get complicated. Employers can choose to use different methods of counting service. And so they have a graph here on this website where they show you an example of cliff vesting and graded vesting. Okay. And when the actual employee becomes 100% fully invested in their 401k. Okay. So always important to understand what exactly you're dealing with. Okay. Now, next up, they're saying when 100% vesting is required, all employees must be 100% vested by the time they attain normal retirement age under the plan or when the plan is terminated. Okay. So at that point, even if they weren't fully vested, they just all of a sudden became fully vested. So there you have it, my friends. Hopefully that was helpful for you. I can't even tell you how many deals that were predicated off of someone who didn't have the requisite cash, but we were able to access it through the 401k loan without them having to take a hit for taxes or pay a penalty.